Now for the moment, that's it when it comes to navigating around and building those two values, like that object here with the query parameter. I now want to move on to another feature which can be useful in some applications, and that would be multiple router views on the same level. We already have multiple router views in this demo app. We have one in app view, and we have one in the teams list component for the nested routes that belong to the route that loads the teams list component. But you can also have multiple router views on the same level, so for the same set of routes. For example, here in app view, we could have a footer element, let's say, but that's not mandatory. But in there, we could have another router view. Now, of course, having two router views on the same level, which are therefore dealing with the same routes, will not be too helpful just like that. If I save that and I reload, we now just see that every page is loaded twice. Of course, because we have two router views. That's probably not the behavior you want. But instead, multiple router views on the same level allow you to add another cool functionality. You can load multiple components per routes and then send them to different router views. Now for that, let's say we have a teams footer.view component, which has a simple template where I say teams footer, just so that we can recognize it. And then I copy that to the users folder, but name it users footer. And in there, it should of course say users footer. Now in reality, you would have more in there than just text, but the main thing is that you have two different components that should be loaded as a footer depending on whether you're in the teams area or the users area of pages. And that could absolutely be a requirement you have in your app. With the view router, that's easy to implement. In your route config, you can register more than one component per route. Here, for example, on teams, instead of just having one component here, we can add components, so plural. And this now takes an object. And in this object, you can now define key value pairs where the keys identify different router views and the values are the components that should be loaded into this router view. And that now works if you give those router views names, just as you can give names to slots. We could give this router view in the footer a name of footer, but the name is up to you. We could also give this router view a name, but just as with slots, you are allowed to have one unnamed router view on the same level, which will then be the default router view. So now here, back in our route config, we can add a key of default to point at this unnamed router view and set up the component that should go into that default, which in this case is the teams list. But we can then also add a footer key here, pointing at that router view named footer, and set up the component that should be rendered in this router view. And that's a component I have yet to import. That will be the teams footer component, which is imported from components, teams footer.view. And when we're already importing stuff, I can also already import users footer from components, users footer.view. And now it's the teams footer, which I want to set as a value for the footer outlet on my components here. Now I don't need to change anything about the nested child route here. Here I still only want to load one component, but the parent has more than one component here, as you can tell. Now we can also do the same here for the users. On the users route, instead of using component, we could use components, set the default to users list, and the footer outlet to users footer. So now we're using these named router views for users and teams. And for all the routes, like this catch-all route, where we just have one component, that one component will always go into the default unnamed router view. So we don't need to set up components here if we only have one router view we want to support here. With that, however, we can save that. And now you see our team items, our teams, and then the teams footer. For user, you see the users footer and the users, of course. If I select a team, we see the team members and then still our two different teams components down there. And if I enter anything invalid, we still just see one not found route. Because as I said, that then goes into the default unnamed router view. So named router views can be helpful to allow you to construct more complex user interfaces where you want to load more than one component for a given path. For example, to not just have flexible main pages, but also flexible footers.